What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at you live once again through the power of the internet, and it's time to look at the most disappointing games of 2015. Two things before we get started. Number one, if you're missing a lot of the gaming content that used to be on this channel, don't worry, I'm uploading 5 days a week on my other channel, Boogie Plays, and you can find a link in the description box below. But secondly, this list is entirely personal taste. I had high expectations for these video games, and they let me down when they were finally released, and that's why they're on the list. If you're enjoying one of these games on the list, don't let my personal opinion affect yours in any way. You do you, boo. Now, coming in at number 10 is a controversial choice, and that's Batman Arkham Knight. And I'll tell you, I understand that this game was actually very good. The reason I understand that it was very good is because I watched it get played. Now, I actually ended up purchasing this game twice. I purchased it on PC and ended up getting a Steam refund because the PC version was completely broken, and that destroyed my enjoyment of the game. Secondly, when I finally got it on the PlayStation 4 with my Collector's Edition, I started playing it there, and I just couldn't get into the game. Too much of the game focused on the Batmobile stuff. It doesn't make sense to me at all that the Riddler is interested in building race car tracks for some reason, and ultimately I ended up watching highlights of this game getting played on YouTube rather than playing it through myself because I just couldn't feel the love that everyone else seemed to feel for this game. At number 9, I've put Battlefield Hardline, which is weird because going into this game I had zero expectations, and yet I feel like this game failed to meet them. Now, I played this during the beta and found it to be okay. I purchased it so that I could continue streaming it on Twitch, and eventually realized that there wasn't much more to the game that wasn't shown to me in the beta. This felt like a light Battlefield game, and that was very disappointing to me, because the last Battlefield game that I had played very much of was Battlefield 3, and I loved it. The epic moments you got into the final release of Battlefield 3 was fantastic. This game lacked many of the guns, many of the vehicles, many of the things to do. More importantly, it lacked the epic moments you could get in Battlefield 3, and I ended up retiring it very, very quickly. And number 8 is a game you've probably never heard of, and that's because it's an Xbox One exclusive called Scream Ride. And this game kind of promised to be a new version, a futuristic version of Roller Coaster Tycoon, allowing me to build my own thrill rides and crash them and do all kinds of goofy things with it. And whereas it did actually do those things, it was terribly unfun to play. It didn't feel epic, it didn't feel interesting, it didn't even really feel like a game. It felt like a simulation of something that was overall pretty boring. The reason this made the list is because I really feel like the people who built this game wanted it to be the next Roller Coaster Tycoon, and I can share their frustration because we're all waiting on that game, and Scream Ride certainly was not it. At number 7, I've put Mario Party 10. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that I'm a huge Mario Party fan. I like screwing over my friends. I like mini games of all types. I love board games, so Mario Party is a natural favorite of mine. This game made some heavily dramatic changes to the formula that ultimately ruined the experience for me. There are 2 ways to play Mario Party 10, and the first is the Amiibo mode. And they use the most annoying mechanic in the world. Instead of rolling using a controller, you wave your Amiibo over the sensor pad, and that makes you roll. And it's so annoying passing the pad from person to person and having them wave their stupid little Amiibo over it. And because of that, I abandoned that mode almost immediately. The second big way to play is either Bowser versus everybody or everybody kind of against everybody. And in Bowser mode, that was a welcome addition. Versing Bowser, and Bowser being the player with the Wii pad, but that ultimately got boring very, very quickly because there simply wasn't enough mini games to keep it interesting. The classic way to play, which is everybody against each other, ultimately was kind of crappy because everyone traveled across the board together. The boards were linear and annoying and frustrating, and players moved together, and it took away an epically important part of the game, screwing over each other. The choice to put Mario Party 10 into some sort of hug box ruined it for me, pretty much maybe ruining the series for me forever. At number 6 is The Order 1886, and man was I looking forward to this game. I feel like the critics shit on it a hell of a lot harder than they ultimately should have, but this game was still very, very disappointing to me. I played this game in 2014 at the PlayStation Experience, And the demo that I played was fairly misleading because it dumped me directly into combat, and I got a chance to play their cover system, their firing system, and then got to explore a Zeppelin a little bit to see the world, and it was actually really fascinating. I felt like this game was going to be very, very good. I could not have known how short it was going to be. I could not have known how full of cutscenes, how full of theater and cinematic goodness it would possibly be, and I absolutely could not have known that the bulk of the game would simply be quick-time events, and when I got it home and started playing it for myself, it turned out to be very, very frustrating. At number 5 on my list is a game that's going to be on everybody's list this year, and that's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. And this game was not even on my radar until a week before it came out. Me and my wife were watching YouTube, and we saw an advertisement for this game, and my wife is like, man, I love those games. I hope that one's good. I grew up on those games as well. I was really hoping that this one would be good. It definitely is not. Ultimately, this game plays like a game built in 1999, not 2015. It has learned nothing from modern game building techniques, and ultimately it was also broken. Not only did it not do what it was trying to do, but what it was trying to do was just plain wrong. At number 4 is Star Wars Battlefront, which ultimately is not a terrible game by any stretch of the imagination, and many of my fans really enjoy this game. I think my problem was that my expectations for this game were very, very high. And a lot of those expectations were met. Graphically, the game is beautiful. It sounds and looks like the Star Wars universe. But when I got into the game and realized there was very, very little content to keep me playing, I was heavily disappointed. I wanted this game to be the game I streamed all throughout the month of December until the Star Wars movie was released, and I even couldn't enjoy it for more than a couple of nights. At number 3, I've put Evolve. And this is a game that I was excited for right up until release. This game being made by people who made Left 4 Dead, creating an asymmetrical shooter that involved hunting monsters, sounded fantastic. But when the game was released, we were met with very, very little content, a lot of content locked behind a paywall, and ultimately the premise of the game not being that interesting. If the person playing the monster is very good, then the hunters are simply running in circles around the map trying to catch him until the monster is fully evolved, and then they get their asses beat 9 times out of 10. Ultimately, the game just should not have made it out of beta until it was made into a much more fun game. At number 2 is Hatred the video game, and ultimately there's almost nothing good to be said about this game. First, they chose to market this game based on shock value, and that shock value resonated through the gaming industry and its fan base, tearing open old wounds, pissing people off, and putting YouTubers against YouTubers, gamers against gamers, writers against writers, and it ultimately sucked because it was manipulative bullshit. When the game finally does come out, it's not particularly interesting. It's fairly derivative gameplay with a few shock value cutscenes and a few shock value game mechanics, but ultimately doesn't live up to be much of a game at all. The only thing I can personally say good about this particular video game is that it shows us that a video game deserves the right to be disgustingly ultra-violent or sexual or whatever the hell you want it to be. Video games deserve to be protected under the freedom of speech, even if it turns out to be kind of boring like this one. And finally, at number 1, the most disappointing game, in my opinion, for 2015 is Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. Now, if you know me at all, you know that I love Toys to Life games. But the big concern is that eventually there will be a game that costs full retail or close to it that requires amiibos so extensively that it's completely unfun or unplayable unless you have a lot of them, and this is that game. What makes this game even worse is that it is basically a reskin of Mario Party, completely eradicating the mini-games and instead putting in little squares that when you land on them gives you a minor story. Maybe you interact with a character and gain bells or happiness, or maybe you land on a place and it tells you a story about how you stubbed your toe that day and lost 10 happiness. But it replaces mini games with the most boring cutscenes I've ever endured in a video game. Holy shit. When I was organizing this list, I thought, Boogie, you can't put that as your number 1 game. But then I went and checked Metacritic and saw that it has a 4.2 user score and a 44 Metacritic score by the critics. 44 out of 100. 4 out of 10. Those are the kinds of numbers that critics reserve only for games that have like too much water in them, like that Pokemon game, or maybe a game that has a girl with big boobs in it. And that's my 2015 most disappointing list. I'm curious as to what you think I got wrong. I'm curious as to which games you think should have been on the list and were not. Let me know in the description box below. And remember, I'm just one man with his opinions. Your opinions are just as valid and as important as mine, because art and video games and life, it's ultimately subjective. And ultimately, I think you're just as important as I will ever be. So guys, thank you for watching. I love you very much. And I'll speak with you again soon.